Okay, we are beginning. Okay, so just to bring us back in, so we saw our Mishnah said ein mevakin eitzim at the Reisha, and then at the end it said no, you can, but you have to use a specific type of cutting device. And you have to do it in a certain way. And so the Gemara said, "What's the deal?" And it explained mechusar katani, that there was some type of, you have to read the Mishnah a little differently. So the Mishnah seems to be dealing with issues of muksa. You can get around the issues of muksa, but at the end, when the Gemara says, if you get rid of muksa, if you get around the issues of muksa, you still have some type of issue, and therefore you need a shinui. Now the question is, why? What exactly is going on here? Is there a malacha done? What exactly is the shinui getting around? Why all of a sudden is going to be mutter? What was the problem in the beginning? So what we mentioned was that the Gemara in Shabbat says that if you go ahead and you are saliti, you're chai mishum tochen. If you go ahead and you cut wood very small, so you have a problem of tochen. That's how Rashi explains. Eitzim dakim la'avira eish, to go ahead and you're cutting them small in order to go ahead and make them more usable for firewood. So the big question is, well, why is it going to be mutter here on Yom Tov? Why is it all of a sudden, can you go ahead and do the malacha of tochen for Yom Tov? That's the problem. So possibly the easiest way to get out of it is what we said in terms of the name of the Tosfot Harid and the Mordechai. Also brought down in the name of the Maharam, that our case is not dealing with that. Ein hachanami, you're right. If there was an issue of tochen, if we were doing the malacha of eitzim dakim la'avir the eish, cutting them really, really small, so then it would be a problem. We wouldn't go ahead and allow that on Yom Tov because tochen is not permissible on Yom Tov. Rather, what's our case? We're talking about not cutting them very small, leaving them big, just making it manageable, that now you can go ahead and use it for wood. So since there's no issue of tochen, it's just an issue of tircha. So they allowed the issue of tircha so long as you do it with a shinui, in order to make it recognizable, make it a little different from how you would do it during the week. That was one way that some of the Rishonim deal with this issue, that we're not dealing with that case of eitzim dakim. There is no malacha involved, it's just an issue of tircha. But the majority of the poskim say that there is some type of malacha involved, it is tochen, and the question is, well, how do we deal with it? So we first mentioned the opinions of Rashi and the Rambam, who are not the same opinion, but they use the same type of language, that there's a difference between when defining what malacha is allowed to be done on Yom Tov or not. It's a difference between what is efshar la'asot mi'erev Yom Tov versus efshar la'asot mi'erev Yom Tov. Could I have done this on Erev Yom Tov and there would have been no lack or diminishment in the effect of the malacha, versus doing it on Yom Tov itself? For instance, if I go ahead and I harvest grains, so there's no difference if I or gather it from the field. I do ma'amer, right? So there's no difference if I gather it in from my field on Yom Tov or if I did it on Erev Yom Tov. That being the case, so it wouldn't be permissible to do on Yom Tov because you could have just as well done it on Erev Yom Tov without any detriment to the effect of the malacha, to the food itself. The issue that all the Rishonim raise against this is that we don't really find such a distinction when it comes to the malacha, to the ochel nefesh. When it comes to, we have that distinction of efshar versus efshar when it comes to machshiri ochel nefesh. That was the Gemara in Beitza, as well as the Gemara in Megillah. So they both bring the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda holds that, here we'll read it inside again, Titania, in source number 12, Ein ben Yom Tov the Shabbat el ochel nefesh bilvad. The Chachamim hold that there is no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbat except for ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshiri ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda goes ahead and he says not only is ochel nefesh going to be permissible, but even machshiri ochel nefesh, even things that are done preliminary to prepare the food, that would also be, malacha would also be permissible for that. And then they have a limud from the psukim and their hu levado yaseh lachem. Less important. But what we see here is that the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda argue about machshiri ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda says that machshiri ochel nefesh are permissible on Yom Tov if it's machshirin that were iyavshar lasoto me'erev Yom Tov. You could not have done it on erev Yom Tov. Right, but if you couldn't have done it on Yom Tov, so you could do it on Yom Tov. If you could have done it on Yom Tov, so then you cannot do it on Yom Tov itself. That's the opinion of Yehuda. The Chachamim say, Mapitom, there's no distinction. Efshar, machshirin are out. You can't do machshirin on Yom Tov at all. So the Rishonim learned from that both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim agree that the distinction of efshar and efshar is not relevant at all to ochel nefesh. The very fact that they're arguing about that Rabbi Yehuda brings the distinction, Tosfos points this out over here, the very fact that Rabbi Yehuda brings the distinction of efshar versus efshar by machshirin means that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of that distinction when it comes to ochel nefesh. Even if it's something, there's no distinction efshar, efshar. Okay, there'll be some other way we're going to have to determine what melechet are permissible and not permissible on Yom Tov. But it is not efshar and efshar. And the fact that the Chachamim don't argue with Rabbi Yehuda on the melechet, on ochel nefesh itself, means, says Tosfot, that they too don't hold of such a distinction when it comes to ochel nefesh. So that's the kasha that all of the Rishonim ask on Rashi and the Rambam. Okay, so now we are now in the stages of answering it. So how do we answer for the Rambam? This distinction of ochel nefesh, of efshar versus efshar. Anyone remember?
No.
The Rambam's distinction of efshar versus efshar, and we'll read it again inside. Kol malacha she'efshar la le'asod me'erev Yom Tov, v'lo yeh bo hefsed, v'lo chisaron im na'asit mi've'erev, asur chachamim la'asot ota b'Yom Tov, af al pi shehi l'tzorach achila. Any malacha that could have been done on erev Yom Tov, and there would have been no detriment to the food itself. So if you had done it on erev Yom Tov, so the Chachamim made it asur to go ahead and do on Yom Tov, even though it's for tzorach achila. And why did the Lama asru davar zeh? Gzeir Hashem yaniach adam melachat she'efshar la'asota me'erev Yom Tov l'Yom Tov. V'nimsa Yom Tov kula holech be'asiyat otan melachot v'yimena misimchat Yom Tov v'lo yeh lo panai le'achol v'lishtot. So the reason the Chacham made this gzeira is because if all of a sudden people are just saying, well, I can do it on Yom Tov, so why don't I finish up the stuff that I can't do on Yom Tov? I'll mow my yard or whatever, and all the stuff dealing with my food and tochen and ba'amer and all that stuff, I'll just do it on Yom Tov itself, not a big deal. So the Chacham didn't want everybody saving things for Yom Tov, so they went ahead and they said, don't do it on Yom Tov if you could do it on Erev Yom Tov. We have a similar example we have with haircuts and shaving for Chol Hamoed. Then it should be mutter. And the Chachamim came along in the Mishna and he said, well, people are just gonna wait to go to the barber until they have more free time, which would be on Chol Hamoed. So they said, you can't do it, right? Unless there was a onus, you were in prison or something like that, or possibly COVID-related issues, which was a big shaila last Pesach and on Sukkot about haircuts on Chol Hamoed, right? But they wanted to make it's an interesting topic. They wanted to people couldn't get haircuts on Erev Chag because they were all closed because of stay-at-home owners. So they were opening up on Chol Hamoed. Question was, can you now go ahead and get a haircut on Chol Hamoed? Mishna says it's asur. So many poskim wanted to go ahead and compare it to the cases of on the Mishna of ones. You're on moose, like you're in a big hasor, you're some type of prison where you were not able to get a haircut. It was beyond your ability because they were all closed, and some poskim therefore were matir to go ahead and get haircuts during the pandemic when the barbershops opened. Side point, not really related.
Why can't you get a haircut on Chol Hamoed?
So that's the same reason the Rambam's saying here. We see this, the Rambam's explanation here is actually, I think it's taken from the Mishnah in Moed Katan, right? Moed Katan is the Mishnah that if what happening was what was happening was people were leaving their haircuts and shaving. They'll say, I'm so busy with my business. I'll get a haircut on Chol Hamoed because I can't work anyways. I can't I can't just go about my regular day. So I'll get a haircut on Chol Hamoed. And what happens is that they're busy they're saving all of their chores, so to speak, for Chol Hamoed instead of actually enjoying the Chol Hamoed itself. So the Chachamim said, enough of this. Can't get a haircut on Chol Hamoed anymore. You should have to do it beforehand.
So let me understand this. So Erev Yom Tov, Erev Pesach, when you're busy, preparing the Korban Pesach, you're busy basically baking matzahs for first night of Pesach, and you're busy, doing everything else, and you're supposed to find time for a haircut. But during Chol Hamoed, you're not so busy, then not a problem. That's the problem.
No, wait. So the other issue is people don't want you. The Chum didn't want you to come in as looking all as a menuvel. So this the language of the coming into Yom Tov not looking nice. You say, I'll save it for Chol Hamoed. Now you just went through a day or two of Yom Tov and you didn't look nice.
Right.
So therefore, they made it prohibited to do on Chol Hamoed so that you make sure that you did it before Yom Tov.
I hear it, but it doesn't make any sense, and certainly in today's context.
What do you mean in today? You might be right. What do you mean in today's context?
Well, because a lot of people work on Chol Hamoed.
Right. So the issue of working at Chol Hamoed, Rav Moshe already has a famous tshuva about that in terms of hefsid. And if a person is going to lose his job, which in a lot of cases you're not allowed to just take off whenever you want, so then that's considered hefsid. And b'makom hefsid, you're allowed to work. I thought we were going to say something else in terms of shaving. That there's some poskim that say nowadays where we shave every day.
Yeah.
So not only should it be permissible to I shaved on Erev Yom Tov. What do you want from me? But 3 days later, I look a homeless because now I'm all scruffled. So some poskim say enachanami. Nowadays, if you shave if somebody who shaves normally every day or two, so the same should be on Yom Tov. It doesn't look nice that a person should go around on Chol Hamoed not looking nice, and therefore it would be an obligation to shave every day of Chol Hamoed. So a lot
especially Erev the second day.
Yeah. I mean, you look around some shuls, people going into Yom Tov, it looks like they're coming out of Shiva, but yeah. So there's definitely some truth to that. So for people who shave all the time. Okay. In any case, that idea of the Mishna of forbidding certain things lest people make light of Yom Tov or Chol Hamoed, we already see that in the Mishnah, and the Rambam is borrowing that logic and he's applying it to his understanding of why the Rabbanim would come now on Yom Tov and say certain melechot are prohibited. What are those melechot? Anything that could have been done beforehand, and there's no chisaron for the food itself. Okay. Now, what do we do with the question? What do we do with the question of all of the Rishonim? Hey, this whole distinction of efshar and efshar only exists on the level of machshirin. That's a machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim on level of machshirin. Why are you going ahead and telling me now that has to do with the malacha for ochel nefesh itself? Howie, I think last week you said the answer.
Who remembers?
The Rambam is only talking about on a level of derabanan here. Right? Who went ahead and made this distinction of efshar and efshar? The rabbis did. Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim's argument about machshirin, that's on a level of daraita. Ein achanami. That distinction of efshar and efshar only exists with machshirin on a level of daraita. That's it. What the Rambam is saying is that the rabbis came along and they wanted to go ahead and make certain restrictions for melachot ochel nefesh that could be done on Yom Tov, and they fashioned it after some type of system that was already in place, which we see by machshirin, and they borrowed that. The rabbis just borrowed that system and they applied it on a rabbinic level to ochel nefesh. So Tosfot and the other Rishonim will attack. They're right. We only see such a distinction on a level of daraita for machshirin, but the Rambam is talking on a level of derabanan, so it's not such a kasha on the Rambam. The rabbis can set up the system how they want. Good. We're all good with that. Okay. what we left off with was a question on Rashi, because all the Rishonim assume that Rashi makes the distinction of efshar and efshar for the melechet and ochel nefesh themselves, that distinction exists on a level deoraita. How could that be? So that's what Bezrat Hashem today we will answer. So in order to do that, let's delve into some other shitot of the Rishonim in terms of how to understand, how to categorize which malachot are permissible for ochel nefesh and which are not, and we'll hopefully borrow some of those systems and apply them to Rashi. That is our goal. Okay, so we mentioned Tosfos. We brought Tosfos. Tosfos brings the opinion of Rabbeinu Netanel, quoting from the Yerushalmi, that it almost seems like a gzeirat hakatuv, that it says, the pasuk says that we learn out the heter for ochel nefesh, ach asher ye'achel l'chol nefesh, that's hu levado yaseh lachem, that's the pasuk that we learn out ochel nefesh from. V'samach lei v'shamartem et hamatzot. It's right next to the pasuk of, and you have to guard the matzot. Otam malachot mishimor be'elach hein mutarot. All those malachot which come from the stage in the matzah process, the making of the matzah process that requires shimor, that needs to be protected, extra guarding to make sure that it doesn't become chametz. Only those malachot from that stage onward need to be only those malachot from that stage onward are permissible for Yom Tov, and anything beforehand is not. Here there's a cutoff. And what's that cutoff? Dahainu melisha ve'elech. Only in the when making matzah, really mikra adin, the only part which you have to have lishma, whether lishma means l'shem mitzvos matzah, that you're having some type of like spiritual intent, or lishma means that you are guarding it from becoming chametz, right? Either opinion in the Rishonim. That really only needs to be done milisha ve'elach when you're going ahead and you're adding water to the flour mixture.
But
Once you do that,
matzah specifically nowadays, especially, is mishmur mishas ketzira.
So it's machloket. Lechatchila, we do it from mishat ketzira, but mikra din, if somebody didn't have a flour from that was shimor mishat ketzira, so they can use they can get flour from the shuk. You can just go to the supermarket, buy flour, and mishat lisha ve'elach. Then when you put in the water, now you have shimor. So we're machmer, but mikra din we would suffice with lisha ve'elach.
Okay. So
Okay.
the chumrah could actually turn out to be a kula, because then you would be able to, if you go from ketzira, then you'd be able to do all the malachos. Right.
Okay, good. Right. Well, let's apply that, because the problem with right, he's ashar malachot mikodem lechein asur, and anything before lisha is going to be problematic. The problem with the shita, it sounds very nice. You got something you don't need. Once you say it's exeris akasa, so I'm all good. I don't need logic. It just just tell me what I have to do. These are malachot that I can do. These are malachot that I can't do. The problem is that it doesn't really work. This magic recipe, as we mentioned last time, there are plenty of malachot that are clearly mutter to do on Yom Tov that come after lisha. I'm allowed to go ahead and shchita. Mikra din is mutter on Yom Tov. Nowadays we don't do it for various reasons, but mikra din I'm allowed to do that. All right, but shchita is way after lisha. So
No, the other is before, you mean?
it's after. Yet nonetheless it's mutter. Right? Oh,
Yeah,
right.
everything after
Sorry,
lisha
let me
would
stay
be
back there. And there are malachot that are after this that are clearly usher, like kotev or boneh. The Gemara says I'm not allowed to make cheese. You're not allowed to make megaben. Megaben is the malacha of boneh, and you're not allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov. Why not? It's after the lisha process. It's after that stage in the process. Didn't the Yerushalmi say lisha ve'elach? So although at first glance this opinion of Rabbeinu Netanel quoting Yerushalmi sounds nice and magical, it becomes difficult if that's what it means, literally lisha ve'elach. Okay, so we're gonna have to deal with that as well to try to understand, is there does lisha ve'elach, questions like this, does lisha ve'elach mean literally lisha is the threshold, from this malacha on, everything onward is going to be permissible, which if that's what it means is very difficult because it's just not true? Or does is that telling me something about the type of malachot? It's not a threshold, but it's telling me certain type of malachot. That'll become clearer as we go along. Okay. So we mentioned the Ramban. The Ramban, which I think is a beautiful, in terms of pshat of the psukim, the Ramban's distinction between what malachot are permissible and what are prohibited, it's gold. It's gold in terms of fitting it into the psukim. In terms of the cases in the Mishna and the Gemara, there might be issues, but in terms of the psukim, it's excellent. What does the Ramban say? I'll just say it outside. The Ramban says that there's a difference between melechet avoda and melechet ochel nefesh. Every time the Torah says kol malacha, the first time the Torah brings in the idea of malacha that you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov, it says kol malacha lo ya'aseh b'hem. But then immediately afterwards, it gives me a miyot. It goes in and tells me, but 1 second, there are malachot that I'm allowed to do of the kol malacha. What are they? Ach asher yachal l'chol nefesh. The malachot of ochel nefesh within kol malacha, I'm allowed to do that. So what malachot am I not allowed to do? I'm not allowed to do malachas avoda. What's melechet avoda? Melechet avoda is anything which has to do with what we refers to is that requires kind of like field work, or it's for yamim ravim. That's melechet avoda. And why does it fit so nicely in the psukim? Because if you look elsewhere, every time the melechet of Yom Tov are forbidden in the psukim, the psukim come and they prohibit them. It either says kol melechet avoda lo ta'asu, specifying only melechet avoda you're not allowed to do, or it says or it says lo ta'aseh melacha. It doesn't say kol. It just says malacha. What malacha? Oh, go back to what we were talking about before, right? So malacha, kol malacha means everything, and anytime it says kol malacha, it tells me a miyut of ochel nefesh. And if it doesn't say kol malacha, it says melechet avoda or just malacha. Okay, so why is that important? Because the Ramban is now making a distinction between, in terms of malachot, in terms of their essence, what are they set out for? Are they food type malachot, or are they malachot that are for another purpose? Because there's sometimes I could do a food type malacha for something that's not food. And there's sometimes I could do a non-food type malacha for food. Right? For instance, kotev. Kotev is not a food type malacha. Writing has nothing to do with the food process. But theoretically, I can go ahead and I could use that malacha for food. I can write happy birthday on a cake, or, chag kasher v'sameach on the cake. Even though that's for food, that is not a melechet. That is not a melechet ochel nefesh. That's a melechet avoda. Similarly, bona. Bona, if you look at the majority of the uses of bona, it is not a food type malacha. It is for building a house. It is for for digging a ditch in the floor in your house, something like that. That's bona. Making a partition. That's bona. Cheese happens to also be the malacha of bona. Making cheese happens to also be the malacha of bona by technicality. But just because I'm now using the malacha of bona for food is not going to now make it permissible. That's the Ramban. All right, let's put that on the back burner as well. We're going to come back to that. All right. Let's jump to the Bnei Yeshua. I'm going to say the Ran outside. We're not going to learn the Ran inside because the Ran, I want to come back to that. But the Ran, he wants to make a declaration. He wants to say that that breaking the wood, cutting the wood, is not machshiri ochel nefesh. It's ochel nefesh atzma. Why he wants to say that? Let's leave that for now. But I want to look at the Pnei Yeshua, because the Pnei Yeshua comments on this, and he says like this. The af de efshar de lefize bakua etzim hare havi kamo lisha she'ein mechusar malacha acheret. What does he mean by that? Yeshua says that cutting the wood, chopping the wood, is like lisha. Why? She'ein mechusar malacha acheret. There's no other malacha that's missing. What does he mean? What do you guys think?
It's the last step that you take before you have it in its final prepared form that you're going to use it.
Excellent. Right? He's saying
Like a makeb b'patish.
In a certain respect in that stage, right? He's saying like this. What's unique about lisha? As in terms of the 11 malachot of making bread. At the lisha stage, right beforehand, you plant and you plow and you harvest and you grind and you do borer of separating. You do all of these things, but all of them are in and of themselves. They're kind of meaningless if you don't do something else afterwards. If I go ahead and I do choresh and I plow my field, so it's meaningless if I don't go ahead and plant. And if I plant and I don't go ahead and harvest, so that's also meaningless. And if I harvest, but I don't go ahead and take out the grains from the shafts and grind them and separating and do all of these things, then it becomes a meaningless stage in the process because I have nothing to work with. But once I get, sorry?
So it is something between muhsher and actual malacha itself?
It's good. You could say it's muhshar in terms of giving me food to actually have, right? It's all very good. It's all preparatory in terms of giving me now substance that I actually have food. Once something magical happens at lisha in the process, which is basically this. Now I have food. Before I had matter which could become food. Now I'm at lisha. I have food. I have dough. Now I know you guys are thinking, what do you mean? You have to bake the dough. But just ask my 3-year-old, you can eat raw dough. Okay? It's just plenty of people eat raw dough. I think it's more of a girl thing than a boy thing.
It's a hybrid, though, I guess you could say.
It's begun that stage. It's now we're within what we can call food. Right? Beforehand, it's all prep. Now we're in business. Now it's now I'm ready to go as is. If you want, you can go ahead and do more with it. But now we're in business.
It's also all the work prior to lisha is done in quantity. No one harvests one thing of wheat. Like everything is a mass production until lisha, and lisha can be done on an individual level. So it's normal for people to make bread in their house. So once you have the flour and everything else, the lisha is something that can be done in a small scale.
Right. Excellent. So the Ran is going to make that chiluk. We'll talk about that. I think it all ties together. Right? You know what? Let's look at the Ran right now. Because you mentioned it, let's look at the Ran. This is what you just said is more or less the opinion of the Ran and the Rush. They don't say exactly the same thing, but we're going to group them together for simplicity because it's more or less the same. We'll say the Ran outside, then I'm going to read it inside. But the Ran is basically saying what Howie's saying. The malachot which are done the yamim rabim. I'm not doing it, for the immediate use now. I'm doing it for mass production to put in my storehouse, right? So those malachot are going to be prohibited on a level of derabanan. Right? And it's all for the same reason. Why don't the rabbis want you going ahead and grinding grain and making flour? Because when you make flour, you make a lot of flour. You make tons and tons of flour. And why are you making so much flour on Yom Tov? It's gonna waste your whole Yom Tov. It's gonna waste your Simchas Yom Tov. So we say, don't do that type of malacha. You need to make a little bit of dough, make a little bit of dough. You need to cook something fresh, so cook something fresh. But now you want to go harvest your field? That's crazy. How much stuff do you need from your field? So the Ran says that's why they prohibited those malachot. We'll just jump to where he says over here. at the end. A very interesting Rabbi. Let's just jump to the important line for our sake right now. He thinks it's according to our Gemara, i.e. the Bavli, shekol melechet ochel nefesh ha'asur b'Yom Tov, ina ela midivreihem shechem ha'asur melacha ha'nasot liyamim harbei kektsira v'tchina b'kiyotzi behen. Any malacha which is done for many, many days, the rabbi says, don't waste your time with that. Just don't do that now. I think it's all connected because how he's just taking the Ran and he's connecting it with the distinction that the Pnei Yeshua said, right? It's not just that lisha she'ena mechusar malacha acheret, that I've now entered into this quasi food stage, but it also happens to be that from all the malachot beforehand are done en masse. Why are they done en masse? Because you can. Because it's not for immediate use. It's all prep. And when you're talking about prep, I could do a lot of it at once. Once it's ena mechusar malacha acheret, now I'm ready to go, right? Lahavdil. It's like I take the vaccines and I put it in the tube, in the needle. I open them. So ena mechusar malacha acheret. Now it's got to be used, right? Once you take it out of the deep freeze of -70, you got to go ahead and use it. Lisha, anything before lisha is still in deep freeze. Once you take it out, it's got to be used. It's got to be done. What is this? Okay, now let's bring this back to let's bring it all together now. Perhaps this is what the Yerushalmi really means. When it says, Haina melisha ve'elach, it's not telling me some type of gzerat hakatuv of, the first few malachot you can't do, melisha ve'elach you can, simply because of a gzerat hakatuv in the pasuk. And then we run into, if that was the case, we run into many problems of how come this malacha, how come bona is prohibited, shchita is mutter, they're both after lisha. Rather, melisha ve'elach is saying within the bread process, there's a certain point in which the malachot churn into from being preparatory malacha to being malachot which are designated now for the immediate use of making food. Right? I can go ahead and I could take that recipe of understanding what makes one malacha one thing versus another, and I can apply it throughout the whole spectrum of malachot. I can go now to bishol and shchita and kotev, and I can say, hey, you know what? These malachot, some of them will be like the malachot before lisha, and some of them will be like the malachot after lisha. Right? Cooking is like the malacha after bishol. Shchita is like the malacha of after lisha. After lisha. Bona is not. Bona would be like something before lisha because has nothing to do with preparatory of the food itself. Okay, and that is also in a sense what the Ramban is saying. There are malachot avodah, there are things of the field, things that are all preparatory, and there's melechet ochel nefesh, things that are now, the here and now, right? The valisha ve'elach. How is this going to help us for Rashi? And I think maybe it was Howie. I don't remember. Somebody mentioned this. Maybe Elliot. Somebody mentioned this in their first year. Kind of give a hint to this. Perhaps that's what Rashi means when he says the difference between malachot that are efshar and efshar. Meaning like this: when there's a malacha that I could have done yesterday. And there'd be no problem. It wouldn't have any effect, a negative effect on the food. It's a malacha she'efshar la'asod me'erev Yom Tov. Perhaps that's not let's use a little lumdus terms for this. That's not the siba. That's not the reason why I can't do the malacha now. Rather, it's the siman why I can't do the malacha now. That tells me the fact that I could have done it yesterday and there's no negative effect on the food today is a siman that this is the type of malacha that is of the preparatory kind, not of the here and now, right? This is like, if it's something that efshar la'asod me'erev Yom Tov, then it's like lisha me'elach. it's like melechet ochel. If it's something that I could have done in Erev Yom Tov, efshar lasot me'erev Yom Tov, then it's like before Lisha. Then it's like melechet ochel, melechet avoda. Then it's like, or in the name of in the language of the Ran, it's like malachot hanasot liyamim harbe. It's like all those malachot. I think all of these Rishonim, they're all dancing around the same idea. They're just formulating it in different ways. Okay, so that would be to answer up for Rashi. That and why does he use the language of efshar and efshar? It could be for Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. It really is. That's the siba, but he's just borrowing that language to show me the siman to understand what's a melechet avoda and what's a melechet ochel nefesh. Any questions on Rashi? Any questions on any of that? Please feel free. I'm used to taking lots of questions during my classes. I teach high school boys. They barely listen, so there's always questions. Okay.
We've learned to respect our elders.
Okay.
So Rashi says this is a deraisa though.
Right. Rashi says that the deraisa, but the chiluk of efshar and efshar, it's not the same efshar and efshar of machshirin. The efshar of machshirin that Rabbi Yehuda uses.
Understood.
It's a technical thing. Here he's using that language to tell me on a deraisa level, in terms of getting to the essence of the malacha.
Well, what's his source for it being a deraisa? What's Rashi's source?
It's excellent. So I mean, theoretically, he doesn't explain, but theoretically, what we just did is we were basically saying all of these Rishonim are dancing around the same idea. I could say that the source of Rashi is the same source as the Ramban.
Is the Yerushalmi? Is that what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't say it could say it's the Rishomi, but you can also just as well say it's what the Ramban says. Right? But he doesn't explain it like the Ramban. He doesn't go into the parish of the milim of avoda. The truth is he wouldn't get it from the Ramban, because the Ramban is actually arguing with Rashi here. The Ramban uses melechet avoda to talk about melechet chol hamoed, which the Ramban attacks him on. So it's a good question.
Also, the efshar and the efshar wouldn't fit in, like Rashi's view of it wouldn't fit in all that well with the Ramban either, would it?
It wouldn't fit in with necessarily the words, but I think they're all hitting the same point. It could just be, Rashi read the pasuk when it says "Ach asher yachal l'chol nefesh." He says, "Oh, malachas ochel nefesh." What's malachas ochel nefesh? Ochel nefesh, anything which is that I need now and not something before. How am I going to go ahead and know which malacha is which? Oh, I'll tell you, something that you could have done yesterday and there's no a negative effect. That's not malachat ochel nefesh. But you're right. I wish Rashi would tell me exactly where this chiluk that he makes comes from.
But don't you have cases where it's the same malacha, where it's defined as, if it was efshar, you're not allowed to do it. If it was efshar, you can do it on Yom Tov. Which, if you're saying it affects the malacha itself, that would not work.
Good, excellent question. So this is actually a very difficult point to. The question is like this. I'll ask it in another way. I'll ask Kai's question in another way. When we talk about efshar and efshar, do we mean on? There's two questions to ask on it. Number one, are we talking about categorically? Like, let's take a malacha and say this malacha altogether. Is it something that could be done or couldn't be done? For example, bishul and afiyah, cooking. So fresh bread is just so much better than bread from yesterday, right? I mean, you don't have to go to a 2-3 day Yom Tov and you get to the third day and you're eating stale bread to know that I wish I had fresh bread today, right? So therefore, baking is a malacha that if somebody wanted to do it on Yom Tov, they could do it. But I have a question. Cookies. Are cookies any different if I make them today or I make them yesterday? I mean, I don't have such a advanced palate, but I think it's the same.
Right.
All right. So am I going to go now and say, okay, there are certain types of afiyah that you could do today, and there are certain types of afiyah that you can't do today. Am I going to go ahead and I'm going to take every malacha and I'm going to split it in to specifics of that case? Or do I go ahead and I say, no, categorically, let me look at the majority of the cases of this nature, and therefore it's going to be one rule for all of them, right?
Take grinding of spices, where some spices can't sit and you need to grind it full beyond, and other things can last for weeks.
Right? Why limit at spices? Tochen also applies to grains, right?
Well, because I only said spices because we had the case of spices a long time ago.
Right, and spices are going to be mutter, and grains are going to be prohibited, right? That's one of, and the Gemara doesn't tell us why, and that's why all the Rishonim are like scratching their heads trying to build a system like that, right? And that's a good example. That's an excellent example of the spices of where you see where one of they did go ahead and so to speak refract the malacha into its various categories. But I'll give you another example or another question. Do we look at it objectively or subjectively? What I mean by that is per person. For instance, the Ran asked this case. The Ran asked this on Rashi. Rashi says you can't go ahead and go fishing on Yom Tov because you could have just as well put out a net on Erev Yom Tov, capture the fish, put them in a small fish tank, and then taking them on Yom Tov, and there would have been no malacha of tzeda because they were already considered like trapped, and there would have been no detriment. So the Ran says, wait, one second. Let's say I did like you're saying. Right? I put out my fish net, and I pull it out an hour before Shabbat, before Yom Tov, in the morning of Yom Tov. I pull it out before Yom Tov, and there's no fish. Now what? So says the Ran, maybe it should be mutter for me now to go ahead and do fishing on Yom Tov, to go fishing on Yom Tov. Because you can't tell me this was something I could have done on Erev Yom Tov. I tried to do it on Erev Yom Tov. I threw out my fishing net and nothing came up. So in my specific case, it becomes Efshar. Right? So you see from the way that the Rishonim, some Rishonim take it as objective and subjective. They make different Rishonim will fit into different camps. Looking at either as categorical and objective, or specific to certain malachot or types of circumstances, and subjective to certain people's cases.
Most of
But
these,
but Rashi's following his way of thinking by saying that you have to trap it before, right?
Right. Rashi seems to be taking an objective
approach where the Ran takes a.
Right. The Ran and the Ramban seem to take more of a specific.
And the issue is you have to go through every food that you eat and analyze every food in some ways, right?
Right. So another example. The Ran. I take it back. The Ran is general because he asked this kasha. Is the Ran? Sorry, the Ramban. They're in the same Beit Midrash. It's all good. They asked the following question on Rashi. Ksira. So I can't do ksira. I can't go ahead and pick apples and cut grain from the field because I could have done that yesterday. I could have done it last Tuesday. There would be no difference. But they ask, 1 second, picking strawberries, so that you can't compare fresh strawberries to strawberries from a day ago, 2 days ago. I mean, especially in the days when they didn't have refrigerators. So how come picking strawberries shouldn't be mutter on Yom Tov? So they explain. We look at the general malacha.
Yeah,
We don't look at the specific cases.
they kind of use the reasonable man standard, so to speak, that we do in the legal standards are, which is basically, I mean, you look at it, if somebody could have done something Erev Yom Tov, right? We don't know the specifics of whether he could have done it Erev Yom Tov or he couldn't have done it. Maybe he couldn't have done it Erev Yom Tov. He should be allowed to do it on Yom Tov. He couldn't, bake a cake on Erev Yom Tov because he was busy getting his hair done, cut. Or a shave or whatever he was doing. So he couldn't have done it. I mean, we use a very objective standard. We don't look at the individual and his circumstances in most of these cases. That's the way it generally halacha works.
Right. So it's interesting you mentioned that because it's interesting going back to the Rambam, which we didn't, the original Rambam. Where's the Rambam? here it is. Okay. Here's the Rambam says, you can't cut the wood. How do you do it? You could have done it on Erev Yom Tov. Why didn't they just make it asar? So the Rambam's talking about a specific case. We're worried about this one guy where he thought that he cut all the wood. But lo and behold, on Yom Tov, he comes to, oh no, I messed up. And now this poor guy is not going to be able to go cook. And so therefore they made it categorically mutter because of one specific case, which is interesting, right?
Interesting, yeah, it is interesting, but it's kind of a black hole to go down a halacha based on one individual type of circumstances.
Yeah. So the Rishonim go worry each other. It's not so clear. You have to try to like build a structure of which Rishonim fit on which ones, because they don't all address the issue categorically or objective and specific or subjective outright. I want to mention one more shita, which I think is like, it's kind of like a get out of jail free card, and that is of the Rashba. Oh, I want to do one more thing after. Let's just do the Rashba quickly, and then we'll do the halacha l'maisa. So the Rashba says like this: Kol malacha, this is in Avodat HaKodesh. Kol malacha ochel nefesh heter katuv. Shari achar shetir me'at shenemar achu levado yaseh lachem, achu levado v'lachem yutahem. Okay. Lefichach yesh afilu melechet sheyesh behem tzorech ochel nefesh va'asuran u'masran hakatuv lechachamim. V'hem amru she'hakotze v'hatolish v'hadash v'habor v'hatochen v'hamarake v'hatzad v'hachole v'hamagabin v'hasochet edapero l'otzi mehen mashkin asur. It's amazing Rashba. I mean, you can't argue with it. But he says, masran hakatuv lechachamim. There are no parameters. The Torah said, don't do malacha, but malacha for ochel nefesh is mutter. What does that mean? The Torah is saying, hey, rabbis, you go ahead and you figure it out. You figure out what malachot are necessary and what are not. Does there have to be some type of like magical logic? Not necessarily. The rabbis are going to go ahead and fill in the blanks. And the interesting thing here is that it becomes, Masar Katav L'Chachamim basically means it's on a deoraita level. The parameters that the rabbis set forth take effect on a deoraita level. And therefore, you can go ahead and you can explain any case that you want that's listed in the Mishna or in the Gemara, and you can say, yeah, that's the way they set it up. Why? Because the rabbi said so. Can't argue with it. So it's a wild card. All right.
But you see from the Rishonim that each rabbi, the Chachamim, would define it solely differently, and the Rashba is everything that the Rashba just said. Is everybody agrees as Asr?
The Rashba is arguing with all of these other Rishonim. He's saying that you know why there's no structure given in the Gemara? Why the Gemara didn't tell me exactly the recipe to know which is malachot are permissible and which are not? Because there is no recipe. The rabbis made it up. Because the Torah told the rabbis to go ahead and decide what they should do and what they shouldn't do.
Yeah, but so when they made this decision that because somebody may not have enough wood because he thought he would have a piece and didn't find the piece, then you could do the same thing with the fishing.
Well, you don't even have to get to that.
He tried to go fishing and he didn't catch anything. The fish didn't want to come into the net.
But you don't even have to go to that. According to the Rashba, tochen is aser. You can't grind flour. You can't grind grains on Yom Tov. You want to do it for wood? Okay, fine. Why? Because we said so. That's all. It's a get out of jail free card.
Right.
All right. Okay, we have. I wanted to give you some time to get popcorn before Rabbi Korovkin. So just quickly, it's interesting. You look at how the Mishnah Berurah brings it down. So he deals with the issue of muks at the beginning, and then he says, and when you do go ahead and do it,
this has to go out.
It was muksa issue. If you don't have an issue of muksa, you can't go ahead and get the fire without cutting them, chopping them. You go ahead and you cut big pieces. And you don't use these specific utensils. Rather use this this type of the butcher's knife. Okay. Now look at the Mishnah Berurah. Tell me who the Mishnah Berurah is posking like. Which Rishon is the Mishnah Berurah down? אף אגב דמכשירין שאפשר לעשות מערב יום טוב הוא כיוון דאי אפשר לאפות ולאשר בלא עצים, עשו אותה קדיחת מלח שמותר על ידי שינוי. וגם זה לא הותיר אלא בחתיכות גדולות, דלאו מלאכה היא אלא עובדין דחול, אבל לא חתיכות קטנות דיש בה משום חשש תוכן. Even though this is it's machshirin that you could do on Erev Yom Tov, since maybe you're going to go ahead and hit a, sorry. Yeah, since, sorry.
Not the coleslaw.
Oh, I didn't
They
look
made it
at
like
it.
kadichat.
I forgot.
They made it like kadichat melech that's allowed on mutter with the shinui. And even when they said you're
There's
allowed
one
to do
coleslaw, and
it,
that's the one I picked.
even when they said you're allowed to do it, you're only allowed to do it with big pieces and not small pieces. So there's no issue with tochen. What's weird about this Mishnah Berurah? At the end, he adds, you can't do it with for big pieces.
Right.
Who said that you're not allowed to do it? Who says you can only do it with big pieces and not small pieces? What was the point of that statement? That was
From
So you wouldn't be over toilet.
so you won't be over tochen, right? That was the Maharam, that was the Tosafot Rid. They said, whoa, we're not dealing with tochen, because how are we going to matir tochen? So we must be dealing with big pieces. And then they wipe their hands off and they're done with the sugya. Getting into Efshar and Efshar, right? Efshar lafot v'lasher below, all of this stuff, those were the Rishonim who were dealing with the malacha of tochen. How are we going to deal that we have an issue of tochen, a malacha of tochen? And then they go ahead and they give the reasons of, well, they made it like Efshar and all these things. It has nothing to do with chatikot. They would agree that you could do chatichot ktanot, right? The Rambam would agree you could do chatichot ktanot. If it's the chatichot gedolot, then we don't get into the story. So I thought it was interesting. The Mishnah Berurah, I think it's a question on him. He seems to be combining two mutually exclusive views in the Rishonim. At the Reish of the Mishnah Berurah, he's talking about all of those Rishonim who are dealing with an actual malacha here, and explaining why, nonetheless, it's going to be mutter. And then at the end, he adds this thing. Oh, by the way, only do it for big pieces, which was a totally different view in the Rishonim, that there is no malacha of tochen, and there's no way we would matter a malacha of tochen here. But those shittos don't go together at all. Yet the Mishnah Berurah managed to just stick it in one sentence. Hella. Okay. Baruch Hashem, we finished that sugya. And we're ready to go forward. In a minute that we have left for next week, what do we decide on? 7 o'clock as well? It's Erev B'dikas Chametz. I don't want to put any stress on anybody. We can move it earlier, 6:30. Does that make sense?
I don't.
No?
It's going to be hard.
7 o'clock's not good?
7 o'clock sounds fine for me.
Yeah. I think that's okay.
I'm getting some hesitation. Elliot, 7 o'clock's not good.
Well, what's the
I think
earliest time for
think-
B'dikas Chametz anyway?
You're supposed to start right away. I think that's the issue for me, because
We're supposed to start at Seder Kochavim.
That's later.
Which is what time?
8:10 now.
It's a little later. That's
Yeah.
number one. But Maker Adin, if there's a shiur scheduled, if there's a Torah lecture scheduled, it doesn't have to be canceled for B'dikas Chametz. B'dikas Chametz would go after. So even that's Maker Adin. But B'dikas Chametz would be after. It would be, look right now,
8:11 or something.
8:11. So we just have time, 7 to 8. Would that work?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe we'll do like a 40-minute share or something like that, so that we'll be okay for everybody. Maybe we'll do a little earlier, like a 40-minute share. All right, everybody.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Be well.